We have a 2009 Jetta GLA 2.0 turbo TSI motor, and we're gonna show you how to clean the intake carbon deposits. Yeah, we're gonna remove the intake cover. Be careful popping it off. The squeaks, they hold on pretty tight. It's very easy to break the cover if you're yanking it too much, so be gentle. And we're gonna take the airbox out to gain better access to the intake manifold and everything that's under it. Unclip the secondary air injection inlet hose. Be careful, right on the side of the fitting. Yank it off. Unclip the manifold sensor. I take this clamp off and remove the whole intake box cover. Unclip the secondary air injection inlet hose. Be careful, right on the side of the fitting. Yank it off. Unclip the manifold sensor. I take this clamp off and remove the whole intake box cover. Unclip this cover over here. Got 3 clips on the sides. Don't break the clips when you're doing that. Take this little air duct out. It has clips on the side of the intake. Right down there, there's clips, so stick a screwdriver on the side over here or press on the hose. Usually a screwdriver works better. See these clips? You have to press on the pipe for the clips to come out. Now unclip this little piece of intake. You can leave this part in there. It doesn't have to come out. You have a 5mm bolt holding the rest of the airbox over here. And then the other side of the box, right down there, there's a rubber grommet that holds down the box. So just yank it out. But be careful, there's another hose connected to the intake box underneath. Over there. It's gonna slide out, so don't break that hose. We're gonna unclip this evap hose. Don't break the clips that hold it down. We're gonna take this clamp off and remove the connector. The solenoid itself could stay on the intake. We don't need to take that out. It's gonna get taken off with the intake itself. Try to stick something into the hose so we don't damage the hose while taking it out. Just set this hose on the side. Let it be there. Take this crankcase ventilation hose off of the PCV valve. Don't break it. Remember, you press on the connector like this, and it separates the pins in the connector. Let you take it off. Set it aside. Take this thing off over here. Take this connector off as well. slide it down. Now we're gonna unbolt the fuel line. We are not gonna disconnect this fuel line, we're just gonna unbolt it and set it aside. Here's two T30 bolt screws holding it down. So take them out, set this line aside so it's not in your way. Collect all the screws, remember where they go, because it is important. There's several different types of screws in the manifold. If you're gonna try to put a wrong screw in the wrong spot, you will damage the intake. Take this bolt that holds down the fuel line off. Take a 17mm wrench, loosen up that fuel line on the bottom of the fuel pump. Watch out, there's gonna be some fuel coming out. Let the pressure out first if there's. Alright, now we're gonna remove this hose. This hose goes from a charge pipe that goes to the throttle body to the noise box. Only GTIs and GOI Jettas will have that hose. Regular 2.0 Jettas will not have this hose. This hose pretty much to make a lot of noise, like a turbocharger noise, whistling around. So we're gonna remove this thing because it's in the way. There's a 7mm clamp over here on the charge pipe, and another clamp over here. This one is just a squeeze clamp, and the T30 bolt over here. T30 bolt. This bolt doesn't come out, so you could leave it in the bracket. It will not go anywhere. Just usually walk the hoses off the pipes so you don't damage the hoses. Okay, now you have a T30 screw holding these cooling lines to the intake manifold. Take it out. Be very careful with these cooling lines. They're plastic, very easy to break. You have another T30 screw underneath over here, right next to the throttle body. So we took one out, leave this one in there because we're going to remove this bracket, and it's going to be much easier to remove it underneath. Take this two 15mm bolts out of the bracket. They also hold the alternator, so make sure you put them back in. Now this second bolt screw that holds the coolant lines. Oops. Don't lose any bolts. Make sure, if you do lose a bolt in here, make sure to find it, because it could go into a place where you don't want it to be and cause a lot of damage. Unwind the wire harness, set it aside, make sure nothing's connected on top to the intake. Okay, you do need to take the oil filter out. This one was kind of loose, so something wrong with this filter. It's not supposed to be leaking out. Make sure you don't drop anything into the oil filter spot. Now, there's a bracket on the other side of the intake. Holds down by T30 torque screws. Take that bracket out. It's holding all the wiring to the injectors. Set her aside. You will need to disconnect this hose of a intake manifold runner solenoid. Usually this clamp over here is not too tight from the factory, so usually comes out without damaging the clamp, and you could put her in without a problem. You will need to take the hose off of the throttle body. There's a 7mm clamp on top, and you're gonna need to unbolt it from the block. There's a T30 bolt over here, right down deep next to the transmission. So we're gonna take that bolt out first. There's another T30 bolt holding the charge pipe on the bottom. I'm gonna lift the car up, show you that bolt. I got this bolt over here holding the charge pipe. Check it out. It won't come out, it's kind of stuck in the grommet over there, but it's gonna let you wiggle the charge pipe around. There's a map sensor on the pipe. You're gonna need to disconnect it. It's over here. It's just a little bit above the bracket. Disconnect the sensor, pull the pipe a little bit down. Make sure you don't break anything with the pipe on the way down. There's a lot of hoses in the way, so move and twist everything around so you could take the pipe out. Take this bottom clamp of the charge pipe. If you take the charge pipe out completely, like disconnect it on both sides, it's gonna be way easier for you to manipulate the pipe in there, so you don't damage any other hoses or sensors. You see, this way you could twist the pipe around. See, this is the map sensor I was talking about. I'm gonna remove the throttle body. It's holding by a 4 T30 screws. They are long screws. Do not lose those. You won't find them anywhere. So be careful not to lose them. Do not lose any screws or bolts in this area. Just kind of feel the bolt. Yep, we got our throttle body free. So you got 4 bolts in there, 4 screws, the actual screws. They T30 Turks, very long screws, do not lose them. Set your throttle body aside, do not drop it. They do not like to be shocked. Now, you have a intake manifold bracket over here. It's holding by a 13mm nut on top and a triple square M8, I believe it is, on the bottom. No, that's actually S10 on the bottom. So you're gonna need to take this bolt out and this nut over here. It's gonna be a little tricky if you don't have a swivel or nice tools around. But we do, so it won't be that bad. Yep, you got it. S10 triple square bolt. Then you have a 13mm nut on top of the bracket over here. There you go. Well, we got a magnetic socket we're gonna put in here. We're not gonna use the 13mm here anymore. Take the bracket out, set it aside, and now you could unbolt the intake. You have nothing bolted to the intake besides the intake and the fuel rail. Intake is held down by 7 T30 bolts over here and 2 10mm nuts. Now, when you're looking at the intake, there's gonna be 2 places where there's 2 T30 bolts. This one is a screw, it's not a bolt actually. This one is holding a fuel rail. Do not take this bolt, this screw out. This one is the one you need. Round heads. So, unbolt them all. You got 5 on top, you got 2 on the inside. You could see them through the intake, between the intake ports. You're gonna need a pretty long extension to reach those. There's special openings in the intake, so you could stick your tool in there. Down there, you see the bolt? And you have another one right down there. You got another bolt over there. You have to look at it from the between the runners. Take it out as well. Now you're done with the T30 bolts. Take them all out. Do not leave any bolts in there while you're taking the intake off. Take all the bolts out. You will lose them, and then you're gonna have to find them, and that's gonna be a problem. So use a magnet. Take all the bolts out. God forbid something gets into the cylinders, then you have a real problem. Now you have 2 10mm nuts on the sides of the intake. Take those out as well. Don't lose those. Well, we have a little magnetic socket. Makes it much easier not to lose them. If you don't have a magnetic socket, be very careful taking them out. So now your intake is free to come out. There's gonna be a couple of wires and a couple of brackets to unclip when you pull the intake off. So be careful, don't try to get her all the way out right away. It will not come out all the way. But before you do that, I would suggest you blow off all the leaves and any garbage that's on there. So we're gonna put our oil filter back in. We're not gonna tighten it. It's just so none of the garbage is gonna go under the filter. We're gonna blow the leaves off. Now the reason we take the oil filter out is because right there at the end of the intake we have a intake manifold runner position sensor, this thing right there, and it will not fit through if your oil filter is in place. You will break it, so that's why we take the oil filter off. Now we have all the bolts out of the manifold. We're gonna yank the intake off little by little. Don't force it. Go little bit by little bit. You see, we have some of the injectors came out, some of the injectors stayed in place. Gently stick your hand in there, disconnect the injectors. You're gonna need to disconnect all the injectors, the ones that came out and the ones that didn't come out, because the wire harness for the injector stays in there while we take the intake aside. Now over here at the bottom, this is the high pressure fuel system pressure sensor. You have to disconnect that as well because the wire stays there and the manifold goes on the side. So now we have our intake out. Be careful with the injectors, don't damage anything. Now we'll look into our intake manifold. And it doesn't look that bad until we take these separators out. This is our separators. See how much gunk we got on these guys. Now look inside. See? We got tons of garbage inside. Now see? Our intake ports are pretty clogged up. Look at this. So the problem that this car had, it would misfire for the first like 30-40 seconds of the car running in the mornings. That usually means if you have a random misfire codes. Look at that, oh my god. And you can't seem to find a problem and it goes away, the car runs fine. Just for the first several seconds of the car running. You can look at the freeze frame data of the codes. Good sign if you look at the freeze frame and you see that it was misfiring right around idle and the temperature of the coolant was low. That usually points out to the clogged intake. So we're gonna clean them out. Usually when you take the intake off, you're gonna have, most of the times the engine stops at where the 3 cylinders intake valves are gonna be closed and only one is gonna be open, like number 1 cylinder over here. See, it's open. Do not scrape that. All the garbage will go into the cylinder and will cause damage. Do not touch the cylinder until the valves are closed. So we're gonna be working first on this cylinder number 2 through 4. See, they all closed. We're gonna scrape them first because I found that scraping them first works much better because the gunk is dry in there. It's like a rock, so you could scrape it off, vacuum it out, blow it out, do whatever that you need to do. And if you spray any chemicals in there, it's gonna make it gooey, so you're not gonna be able to blow it out. You're gonna need to clean it off with the chemicals, and that's gonna take you way longer. So right now we're gonna scrape it first with a screwdriver. Don't worry about scraping and scratching the valves because, well, number one, you're gonna need to put a lot of pressure on the valve to scratch it. It's hardened material, so don't worry about that. Number two is the valves are closed, so you will not damage your guides or anything else because the valves are not gonna go in any further than they are right now. They're only gonna go out, so there is no possible way you're gonna damage it to the point of the valve damaging the guides or the seals. So you could scrape it in there, don't worry about it. Well, try to be gentle, don't cause a lot of damage to the head or the valves, but you could scrape it. See, look at the amount of gunk we have there. So we're gonna scrape each and every cylinder like this, and then we're gonna rinse it with the chemicals and use a little wire brush to go in there and clean it up. Now we'll scrape it up all over the place, and then I use a little pick tool and scrape it behind the valve. You gotta get behind. Alright. After a while of scraping, see what we got in there? Doesn't see how much gunk is actually in there, and there's much more. You just need to vacuum this whole thing, all this crap out, and then we're gonna start cleaning it with a little metal brush. So before you vacuum or blow anything in there, see this injector hose that we have open? You must cover them up in order for you to prevent anything going into the cylinders. You also have to cover up the injector tops. So we're gonna put the injectors back in there and cover the tops of the injectors, and we're gonna put our oil filter back on. And then we're gonna start blowing it out, cleaning and everything else. And also close that cylinder that actually has the valves open. Do not leave it open. Anything goes in there, might damage your motor. Okay, so this is how our intake ports look after first round of cleaning. We scraped it with a little flat screwdriver. Now we're gonna fill it up with a 2+2 gum cutter, let it sit for a couple of minutes, and we're gonna use a little wire brush and a drill to clean the rest of it. So we got it filled up with a 2+2 gum cutter, almost all the way. It's soaking. We're gonna use this little metal brush with a drill to clean the walls of the intake runner. Gotta get in as many places as you can with the wire brush. Usually they do break, so be prepared to get any wire brush. Usually they do break, so be prepared to get any Oops, my wire brush broke. Usually they do break, so be prepared, you're gonna need several of them. Now we're gonna use our little suction pump to get all this stuff out of there. So here you go. This is our first round of cleaning the intake manifold. We're gonna just continue just a little bit more. You could leave it like this if you want to. Just gonna do it just a little bit more. We're gonna soak it again. Try to get some more stuff of the valves. But that's pretty clean already. So this is about how much we're gonna end up with it. Yeah, just buff it off just a little bit more on the valves, but pretty much we're all set with these 3 cylinders. Now we're gonna continue on to cylinder number 1. Now we're gonna move on to the cylinder number 1. See, the valves are open in there. So there, you're gonna get inside the car and tap the starter just a little bit, so it makes like a quarter of a turn. Be careful if you have a ignition lock that you turn the key and it keeps on turning the starter until the car starts. You have to just quickly click the starter and turn it off right away. Yep, just enough. See, the valve's closed up. Now we have other cylinders open. So now we're gonna clean this one up. We're gonna scrape it again. Well, not again. We're gonna scrape it first and then use the wire brush. We scrape the cylinder number 1, filled it up with the 2+2 gum coater. Let it soak for a little bit. Alright, we cleaned our cylinder number 1. Now we have all the cylinders clean. Now we're gonna clean up the intake separators. Probably gonna do it on a little wire brush, some scraping on these things, and put them in and put the intake back on. Much easier to clean these things up. They up and open. Alright, now we're gonna soak them in the purple power for a couple minutes, clean them, and put them in. Alright, now we're gonna soak them in the purple power for a couple of minutes, clean them, and put them in. Alright, so we cleaned all the valves out. We got our dividers cleaned. Now, when you put in dividers in, they only could go in one way. Well, you could put them in either direction, like you could put them in upside down, but you will notice that they could only go in flush with the head in one way. So when you put in dividers in, these ends of plastic holders, they have to be flush with the cylinder head, like that. You put it in and it's sticking out, it's obviously not the way it's supposed to be. So put them in flush with the head. Now we're gonna need to replace the injector seals and put the manifold back on. Do yourself a favor before you start this job. Stop by the dealership and get a injector seal kits for each cylinder. They're very cheap, around $7 to $12 a piece. So it's gonna come with like little holders, seals, injector stands, and all the hardware you're gonna need to replace when you're doing this job. I'll take the injectors out one by one. See, this one's missing the stand because we took it out before we took the stand out. Clean the injector seat out. Make sure it's nice and clean. Make sure nothing falls inside. Now we need to see this little washer over here. This thing goes right where it is, under the seal. There's going to be an O-ring seal over here, so make sure this washer is under the seal. It's made to prevent the seal from being pushed out, because the fuel rail has about 1500 psi in there when the car is running, and it will push out the seal. Make sure the seal is on top of this washer. So here you go. This is how injector is going to go in. You have a lower seal on the injector that goes into the head. You have this little stand over here. It's going to prevent the injector from going too deep into the head. You have this spacer over here. That's where the fuel rail bottoms out at. You have this little washer, plastic washer, and an O-ring. need to lubricate this side, this seal, and this seal. So put this one first, put the injectors in. They have to go in just like this, all 4 of them, and then you're gonna loop these seals on top. Alright, we got all our injectors in place. We're gonna connect the wire harness to the injectors. Much easier to do it while the manifold is not on. Set this little wire holder downward. Now take the oil filter back out. You have to clean this surface over here for the intake manifold to go onto. Alright, clean the intake manifold gasket or replace it. Make sure you do not have any seals stuck in the injector ports. Check every port, make sure you don't have anything stuck in there. And now you could put the manifold back on. Make sure your throttle body gasket is still in place. Alright, make sure your injectors seals are looped. Connect the manifold flap position sensor. Now take the manifold and start aligning the studs with the guides and the fuel rail. Align both guides. Slide the manifold downward a little bit. See this wire over here on the sensor? Make sure it goes around the oil filter bracket. There's a fuel line. Make sure it goes under the fitting. Don't force anything. Everything's supposed to go in nice and easy. One more thing, you have a high pressure fuel pressure sensor. Make sure that's connected. It's gonna be really tough to connect it if you forget to connect it, and then you're gonna need to do it when it's gonna be in the car. When the manifold is gonna be assembled, make sure you connect that sensor first. Okay, now look under the intake, flip the injector wiring harness onto the stand, both clips. You'll have 2 more clips on this wire harness holder. Somebody's been here already before us. The wire connectors are broken, or the wire clips are broken, so we're not gonna do that. Make sure you run all the wires that were on top, run them on top. Before you bolt down the intake, make sure all the wiring ran correctly. Make sure all the lines are run correctly. Connect the solenoid for the intake flap. Connect the hose. Remember this hose, this clamp over here, it's not too tight from the factory. We never loosen that hose up. It goes back on nice and easy. So be careful taking it out, be careful putting it in, or you shouldn't have any problems. Now push on the intake in the wiggly motions, side to side. don't force it. If you have to force it for it to go in, there's something wrong. Take the intake off and check it again. When you're done doing that, when the intake is sitting all the way down, there's a little leg over here for the intake flapper. Make sure you can operate it. Press on the intake like it would be bolted down, and make sure you can operate that arm. Sometimes it gets caught on the dividers. If there is something wrong with the intake flap, you might get caught on dividers, and then you're not going to be able to operate it later on, and you're gonna have a check engine light on. So make sure this thing is operating normally. Now you could put the bolts in and tighten down the intake. Before you do that, just for safety reason, put the oil filter back on. Later on we're gonna do the oil change when we're done with the intake cleaning. You should do the same. Now make sure nothing's in the oil filter bracket. Put the filter in just for the hell of it, so nothing falls inside. It's always better safe than sorry. Now throw the manifold bolts in. Top ones you could easily do by hand. Make sure you do not drop anything in there. The two bottom bolts, so we have openings over here, and the bolt hole on one side of the throttle body and the other side of the throttle body. I usually use a magnet. If you're gonna try to do it by hand or with a T30 socket, you're most likely gonna drop it. Then you're gonna have a fun time looking for that bolt. Use a magnet. Put it in with a magnet. So the bolts are in. We're gonna start winding them in one by one. Do it evenly. You don't want to tighten up one bolt and then go to the other side. Do them all evenly to prevent any damage to the intake manifold. We have our T30 socket. The intake manifold should have very little torque. I think the spec is about 5 Nm. So we're not going to torque it down. Just don't over tighten it. Make sure you do not over tighten these bolts. Always tighten them by hand. Now we have two studs sticking out. Now next thing we're gonna do, we're gonna put this bracket back in. We're gonna slide it down. Put it on the manifold first. Put a knot on it. Don't tighten the knot until you actually put the bottom bolt in and tighten the bolt. And just put the knot on and tighten it. Then we'll keep the hole for the bottom bolt. And put the bolt in. See, the hole is right there in the block. Well, you'll have a little bit of fun putting this bolt in, but you have to do it. Alright, we got the bolt in. Now tighten that 13mm nut at the top. Don't go too crazy on it. There's a rubber mount on the manifold. Don't break that. The new manifold is sitting strong now. Now we're gonna need to put the throttle body back in. The throttle body has the winding pins. There's two pins over here, one over here, and one on the back over there. So you need to align it by the pins. Take the throttle body screw, the ones you shouldn't have lost. Put that into the holes. Turn it in a couple of times so it stays in there. Now, T80 Torx. Don't bolt it all the way in until you have all 4 bolts in. Just bring it up so the throttle body is sitting flush but still a little bit loose. Kind of sucks doing it because you can't see anything in there, so you have to go strictly by just finger feeling. Be very careful When you're done bolting the throttle body up, make sure the gasket did not come out and it's not kinked. That's it, throttle body's on.
Chill.
Okay, now we're gonna put this little wire harness bracket back on. T30 Torx. Okay, we bolted the bracket back up. 2 T30 bolts or screws. We bolted the pipes. We have one T30 screw over here, one over here. They're the longer ones. The shorter ones go into the fuel line on top over here. Bolted the fuel line up, and we also bolted the bracket for the noise pipe over here. 2 13mm bolts going through the alternator. Now we're gonna bolt that fuel line back up. Wind the nut up as far as you can go by hand. Do not try to start threading the nut on with a wrench, you will mess up the thread. Then tighten it up. 17mm. We brought the car up. We're gonna put the charge pipe back in. Twist it around so it goes in. Nice and easy. Once again, don't force it. Don't forget to connect the map sensor. That's on the pipe. Turn and twist. You could probably get it right on the throttle body from the bottom. If you're not gonna get it on the throttle body, don't worry about it. You can go on top and do it from the top. 7mm clamp. Make it nice and tight. Alright, T30 bolt over here. But the best idea is to try to get it onto the throttle body from the bottom or go from the top. Put the hose in the throttle body so you don't have to play around with that hose later on. Yep. And bolt these mounting bolts up, and your charge pipe is in place. That's it. Now go from the top, bolt the other bolt up, and tighten the clamp on the throttle body bolt. Make sure your clamp is nice and straight. Somebody's been digging around in the wire harness over here. Put the purge valve hose back on. Clip it like it was. Alright, now we're gonna need to put the noise pipe back on. There's a little bolt over here with a rubber mount. It goes into this bracket. Slide onto the charge pipe, nice and all the way. Put the clamps back on. And you're all set with the church there. Now we're gonna put the crankcase ventilation pipe back on. Make sure it clips in all the way. And time for the air box. Remember this hose, don't break it. Goes into the little hose down there under the headlight. Goes in. There's a rubber grommet over here. You gotta clip that in, and 5mm bolt on this side. With this hose over here from the vent hose, the coolant hose, has to go under the air duct. $5mm bolt holding the air box. Put the bottom portion of the intake in. Gotta go, the bottom goes in first. You have two little clips at the bottom, and then it clips in. And then this little shroud. Clip it into the air box, and when you put it into the top box, look over here. See how it goes in? There's special slots where it goes into. So it's sitting nice and tight. Put the cover back on. Move the cover on. You're all set. Put the intake in with the mass airflow sensor. Clip the secondary air injection intake pipe onto the airbox cover. Make sure it clips in all the way. Make sure all your screws for the airbox are aligned properly. If you could misalign it, if you're gonna start tightening the box, you will break the box if one of the screws is not aligned to the hole. Put the mass airflow sensor in, clip the wire. Tighten the airbox screws. Do not go crazy on the torque. You'll need to take this box a lot of times in the lifespan of the car. Change your air filter. Now change your oil filter and oil, and you're all set. Alright, so we're all set. We're gonna clean up in here a little bit, and we're gonna be done with it. Now, you get in the car, start it up, crank it. It will take a while for it to actually start up, and it's probably gonna be misfiring for the first couple of seconds that it's gonna start up due to the lack of fuel in the fuel rail. But next morning you'll be able to check if your car is gonna be misfiring or not. It's gonna take some time for it to actually push all the air out of the fuel rail. So it's gonna be running up for a while. That's it. Now our jet is running smooth. Remember a couple of things. Be careful, do not lose the bolts. If you lose any bolts, make sure you find them. Do not put anything together until you find the bolts. Be careful on the torque. The intake manifold is plastic. Do not strip the threads in the intake. That will be a problem. Make sure your flap valve is working properly before you assemble everything back up. Make sure your oil filter is tight. Make sure all the electrical connections are connected. Make sure everything is clean. That's it.